Day 661. Tuesday, June 3rd. Ezekiel 41. Ezekiel 41 1-26 NKJV. Then he brought me into the sanctuary and measured the doorposts, 6 cubits wide on one side, and 6 cubits wide on the other side, the width of the tabernacle. The width of the entryway was 10 cubits, and the side walls of the entrance were 5 cubits on this side, and 5 cubits on the other side. And he measured its length, 40 cubits, and its width, 20 cubits. Also he went inside and measured the doorposts, 2 cubits in the entrance, 6 cubits high, and the width of the entrance, 7 cubits. He measured the length, 20 cubits, and the width, 20 cubits, beyond the sanctuary. And he said to me, "This is the most holy place." Next he measured the wall of the temple, 6 cubits. The width of each side chamber all around the temple was 4 cubits on every side. The side chambers were in 3 stories, one above the other, 30 chambers in each story. They rested on ledges which were for the side chambers all around, that they might be supported, but not fastened to the wall of the temple. As one went up from story to story, the side chambers became wider all around, because their supporting ledges in the wall of the temple ascended, like steps. Therefore the width of the structure increased as one went up from the lowest story to the highest by way of the middle one. I also saw an elevation all around the temple. It was the foundation of the side chambers, a full rod, that is, 6 cubits high. The thickness of the outer wall of the side chambers was 5 cubits, and so also the remaining terrace by the place of the side chambers of the temple. And between it and the wall chambers was a width of 20 cubits all around the temple on every side. The doors of the side chambers opened on the terrace, one door toward the north and another toward the south, and the width of the terrace was 5 cubits all around. The building that faced the separating courtyard at its western end was 70 cubits wide. The wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length 90 cubits. So he measured the temple 100 cubits long, and the separating courtyard with the building and its walls was 100 cubits long. Also the width of the eastern face of the temple, including the separating courtyard, was 100 cubits. He measured the length of the building behind it, facing the separating courtyard, with its galleries on the one side and on the other side 100 cubits, as well as the inner temple and the porches of the court, their doorposts and the beveled window frames. And the galleries all around their 3 stories opposite the threshold were paneled with wood from the ground to the windows. The windows were covered, from the space above the door, even to the inner room, as well as outside, and on every wall all around, inside and outside by measure. And it was made with cherubim and palm trees, a palm tree between cherub and cherub. Each cherub had 2 faces, so that the face of a man was toward a palm tree on one side, and the face of a young lion toward a palm tree on the other side. Thus it was made throughout the temple all around. From the floor to the space above the door, and on the wall of the sanctuary, cherubim and palm trees were carved. The doorposts of the temple were square, as was the front of the sanctuary. Their appearance was similar. The altar was of wood, 3 cubits high, and its length 2 cubits. Its corners, its length and its sides were of wood. And he said to me, "This is the table that is before the Lord." The temple and the sanctuary had 2 doors. The doors had 2 panels apiece, 2 folding panels, 2 panels for one door, and 2 panels for the other door. Cherubim and palm trees were carved on the doors of the temple just as they were carved on the walls. A wooden canopy was on the front of the vestibule outside. There were beveled window frames and palm trees on one side and on the other, on the sides of the vestibule, also on the side chambers of the temple and on the canopies. Daily Deep Dive. There is another image today to start the reading found here. Image of God's Millennial Temple Cutaway View. The UCG reading plan states, the temple sanctuary building itself is not described in detail in Ezekiel, but it is described enough to recognize that the design is very much like that of both the tabernacle and the temple Solomon built. This makes sense when we realize that the designs of these earlier structures were given by God to reflect the pattern of the heavenly temple. See Exodus 25:8-9, 2:6-30, 1 Chronicles 28:11-12-19, Hebrews 8:5. To get a full picture of Ezekiel's temple, it is often necessary to refer to details given elsewhere about the first temple, and even the tabernacle. For example, the height of the vestibule, or porch, the entrance hall structure of the future temple, is not given in Ezekiel. It is described in 2 Chronicles 3:4 as being 120 cubits 252 feet in height, making it as tall as a modern 25-story building. The lobby of this entrance hall is described by Ezekiel 40:49 as having inside dimensions of 11 times 20 cubits, 23 times 42 feet. Ezekiel now enters the holy place from the vestibule, verses 1 to 2. There are only 2 rooms in the temple sanctuary, each 20 cubits 42 feet in width. The first, called elsewhere the holy place, is 20 times 40 cubits 42 times 84 feet. The height is given in 1 Kings 6. The height is 30 cubits 63 feet. In the tabernacle and first temple it contained the table of showbread, the 7-branched lampstand or menorah, and the altar of incense. Only the incense altar is mentioned here, Ezekiel 4:122, but that could be because it is specifically mentioned as being larger. Perhaps the other furnishings, if present, were the same as Ezekiel already knew them to be from the first temple. The inner room, verses 3 to 4, called the most holy place or Holy of Holies, is a square 20 times 20 cubits. According to 1 Kings 6:20, its height is also 20 cubits. In the tabernacle and first temple it contained the Ark of the Covenant. Ezekiel does not mention the Ark. Jeremiah 3:16-17 says, "Then it shall come to pass ... that they will say no more, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made any more. At that time Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem." This could mean that there won't be an ark there at all. However, that seems somewhat odd given that there is a heavenly ark that would likely still be typified in the millennial temple. See Revelation 11:19. The point of Jeremiah's statement may simply be that the actual bodily presence of God in the person of the glorified Jesus Christ will so overshadow the ark that this representative object will not even be thought of. People will go to Jerusalem not to visit the mere resting place of the ark, but rather to see where the Almighty King sits enthroned in majesty. What is the ark itself compared to that awesome reality? Interestingly, the statement that the ark will not be made anymore could even indicate that the original ark will be the one brought back and used, though the word rendered made can be variously translated, so the meaning is not entirely clear. Further details on the design and decor of the temple can be found in 1 Kings chapter 6 verses 2 to 4, 14 to 32. It can also be noted that most of the dimensions of the temple structure are twice that of the tabernacle. See Exodus 26:15 to 30. With this initial brief description of the temple sanctuary, Ezekiel moves beyond its 6-cubit thick 12.6-foot walls, Ezekiel 41:5, to the 90 side chambers that surround it. Combined with 1 Kings 6:5-6 and verse 10, we learn that each room is 4 cubits in width and 5 cubits tall, but 5, 6 or 7 cubits in length depending on which of the 3 stories the rooms were on, with the larger rooms on the top floor. These chambers bolster the argument for a 7-palm cubit, which would make the smaller rooms 8.4 times 10.5 feet, with 10.5-foot stories. With a 5-palm or 18-inch cubit, these rooms would only be 6 times 7.5 feet, with a rather short 7.5 feet between floors. The step-like construction of these chambers is described, with the explanation that the configuration allows each floor to be supported on the temple side using 1-cubit ledges, rather than requiring fasteners penetrating into the temple wall itself. Ezekiel 41:6-7, compare 1 Kings 6:6. No mention is given here as to the purpose for these chambers, but other verses, for example 1 Chronicles 9:27, describe Levites lodging all around the house of God. These rooms do seem about the size of bedrooms, with the third-floor chambers being large enough for double occupancy. This would allow a total of 120 beds. We were earlier told that there were steps leading up to the temple 4049. The number is not given. Ezekiel 41:8 describes a 6-cubit elevation around the temple for the side chambers, but when all the various measurements are laid out, it appears that this foundation does not extend underneath the temple itself. There is also a 5-cubit wide terrace along the outside of the side chambers, undoubtedly with a restraining rail of some sort for the safety of those using it. Verse 11, see Deuteronomy 22:8. The 20-cubit wide walkway, verse 10, appears to be the one on the ground level between the temple and the inner court buildings. In verse 12, Ezekiel is shown one of these buildings, the very large structure on the western side of the inner courtyard. It is 70 times 90 cubits inside nearly 28,000 square feet. Not much is said, about it here, but in 1 Chronicles 26:12-18 a storehouse is mentioned, adjacent to a highway, which could only have been on the western side of the temple complex where there were no outer courts. Several other scriptures mention such a storehouse. See 1 Kings 7:51, Nehemiah 10:38, 12:44, 13:12-13, Malachi 3:10, as a place for keeping tithes, offerings and first fruits, as well as temple articles of gold and silver. Since most all of the other buildings are multiple stories, it is also quite likely that this building is similarly tall. We are then given several measurements that are all 100 cubits, Ezekiel 4:1-13. First, the temple itself from east to west is 100 cubits. Second, from the west outer edge of the temple complex through the storehouse and walkway to the west edge of the temple itself, is also 105 plus 70 plus 5 plus 20 cubits. We were previously told of the 100-cubit courtyard in the center, and the 250-cubit east gates with a 100-cubit outer court between them, making the entire complex from west to east 500 cubits, as already mentioned. The north-south dimensions were already defined as 250-cubit gates and a 100-cubit outer courtyard on each side of the 100-cubit inner courtyard at this center. We are now also told that the eastern face of the temple and two 20-cubit walkways are the exact width of the 100-cubit inner court, making the temple itself 60 cubits wide. Verse 14. The western storehouse is also confirmed to be 100 cubits wide, 90 plus the two 5-cubit wide walls. Verse 15. The remainder of the chapter contains details on the appearance of the temple. These include windows and wall decorations of palm trees and cherubim, creatures that in this case had two faces, as opposed to the four faces Ezekiel had seen many years earlier. See Ezekiel 1. There is also a description of the incense altar, 41:22, which was a cubit higher and wider than that of the tabernacle. See Exodus 32. Finally, we are given descriptions of the bifold doors to each of the two rooms of the temple. Further details are given in 1 Kings 6 about windows and wall decorations, although in some cases differences can be noted. End.